Before we begin the story of why this mysterious cat slept by the baby every night, the story of Juniper, I invite you to get comfortable. Let the world fade for a while. If you find yourself drawn into these quiet tales, feel free to like and subscribe. It helps more stories find their way to the firelight. Now, let's begin. In the hush before morning, when the world was still wearing its dreams, a mother stood silently in the nursery doorway, blinking sleep from her eyes. And there it was again. One small, perfect paw print pressed into the cotton blanket beside her sleeping child. Just one. No trail across the floor. No claws on the windowsill. Just that tiny imprint, nestled by the curve of the crib as though some quiet creature had been keeping watch. She stared at it, then at her daughter, Eliza, soundless in her sleep, chest gently rising, lips parted as if whispering secrets to someone in slumber. This wasn't the first time. Since the weather had turned and summer peeled into September, the morning held this strange gift. A trace, a sign. But never the cat itself. Eliza had never cried at night. Not once. Not a coo or wail or startled moan, even in those early weeks when sleep comes hard. Instead, she drifted into dreams as if someone rocked her in invisible arms. At first, her parents thought it must be explained away. Perhaps a neighborhood cat had snuck in. But the windows were always closed. No open doors. No food left out, no shifting shadows on the baby monitor. And still, each morning, the paw print. Gray dust, a hint of dander, pressed softly into the same corner of the blanket. As if whoever left it had only stayed for a heartbeat, or all night. They hadn't owned a cat in years. Eliza's mother tried to brush it off, but her husband noticed too. Eventually, they started leaving things slightly askew at bedtime, an unfolded towel on the floor, a tiny toy near the crib, hoping to catch signs of activity. Nothing ever moved, nothing changed, only the paw print. Once, they stayed up all night. The monitor buzzed softly, the house creaked in its old bones. Dawn broke pale against the curtains, and when they tiptoed in, Eliza was smiling in her sleep. And the paw print was already there. After a while, they stopped questioning. Some things, the mother decided, you don't explain. Some things come poorer for the naming. Because what mattered, what truly rooted itself deep behind her ribs, was this. Her baby slept soundly, as if guarded. As if held in whispering arms, just out of sight. She couldn't help feeling, someone was watching. Not with menace, not with hunger, with love, the kind of love that stays quiet. That leaves no ripples, that comes through windows no one opens. A flicker of twilight, a sigh of fur on fabric. A presence wrapped in hush. There were no double paw prints. No disturbance, just the repeated trace of one, always one, and the piece it left behind. And then, one moon-scalded evening, the mother dared ask aloud. Why only one? But the room, as always, gave no answer. And the next morning, the paw print was there again, as if it had heard her confess her wondering, and responded the way it always did. Silently. No one ever saw the cat arrive. Some things you feel, some things you know. This is the story of a cat named Juniper, and the baby she watched each night. And the mystery of why. It began quietly, the way all secrets do. No bang, no bloom, just a breeze that smelled older than it should, that brushed through the trees like someone walking unseen among the branches. The leaves crisped early that year, curling into rust-red spirals even before the first frost. Mornings carried the kind of stillness that felt like holding your breath. And within that hush, on a sleepy Tuesday when the kettle hadn't yet boiled, the gray cat appeared. She was sitting, unbothered, beneath the nursery's window ledge. Small, delicate, gray like thunderclouds stretched too thin. Her eyes were green, not bright, not emerald, but deeper, like moss soaked in rain. You could lose something in them if you looked too long. No collar, no bell, just 4 white boots on her paws, and a gaze steady as dusk. Eliza's mother paused as she noticed her, standing with one hand on the sink, unsure if the cat was real or some trick of shadow and wind. But the cat didn't move, didn't blink. Just stared up past the glass, past the curtain, to where Eliza napped in her crib. The next day, she was there again. Perched like a statue, watching. As if counting the baby's breaths with every rise and fall under the blanket. Neighbors hadn't seen her before. No flyers, no microchip found at the vet, though one had tried, on a later day, when coaxed long enough to take her in. But Juniper wouldn't stay crated. She was there, and then she wasn't. Polite in her way. Perfectly real. Perfectly gone. They named her Juniper, because she smelled faintly of pine needles and long walks, even when it hadn't rained in days. She came every evening now. Pacing once past the porch. Circling the hedges. Sitting beneath the nursery window, regal and silent for just long enough, and then disappearing before the streetlights hummed on. At first, the family assumed curiosity. Cats were always drawn to warmth, to the scent of milk and lullabies. Maybe Juniper had once belonged to a child, and now drifted toward any sound that felt like memory. But animals know things. And this cat didn't sniff outside the kitchen or mewl at doors. She stayed close only to the child's window, even when offered food elsewhere. One afternoon, just before the sky slipped into that blue that only comes before darkness, Eliza pressed her palm against the glass. Chubby fingers smeared with something sweet. She said nothing, only looked at Juniper, and Juniper looked back. They were mirror images, still and quiet. 2 creatures seeing past the obvious shape of things. That night, Juniper was not outside. She was in the house. No one saw her slip in. There'd been no door left ajar. No unexpected creak on the old floor. But when Eliza's parents peeked into the nursery around midnight, just to be sure. There she was. Curled at the base of the crib like she'd belonged there since the house was built. Tail wrapped around herself, breathing steady. And Eliza? Sound asleep. A soft smile tugging at the edge of her lips. They didn't move her. Didn't try to chase the cat out or puzzle the mystery. Only closed the door more gently than usual, heartbeats just a little uneven. From then on, Juniper came every night. Always just before the stars blinked into being, and always without invitation. She didn't climb furniture or scratch wood. She stayed close to Eliza and nowhere else. Some nights, the baby hummed softly to herself, between sleep and waking, as if singing to someone in the dark. And if you pressed an ear to the door during those moments, you could hear Juniper's purring, low and even, like the engine of some old forgotten lullaby. By morning, she was gone. No trace, no fur, just that same single paw print. Pressed into the blanket, as though reminding them gently, I was here. She is safe. And when Eliza stirred, the first thing she always looked toward was the edge of the crib. As if someone should still be there. And somehow, they were. The baby's name was Eliza. She was a quiet one, curled into herself like a bean sprout in warm earth, content to drift. She rarely fussed, rarely shrieked. Even in the muddled first weeks, when most infants cry simply to exist, Eliza never did. Her parents noticed it early. How she'd stare past them sometimes, over shoulders and through door frames, as if something else hovered just beyond the edge of focus. Something unseen, but not frightening, just more. They chalked it up to newborn sensitivity. How babies see edges our adult eyes long forgot. Shapes in the space between wakefulness and toddling. But one afternoon changed how they saw everything. It was late, gold light hour, when day holds its breath just before dipping into dusk. The window in the nursery was cracked open, letting in breeze and birdsong. Eliza lay in her crib, eyelids heavy, the smell of warm talcum clouding the air. And then, Juniper appeared. Not at the window's base, but on the ledge, balanced impossibly still. Sea glass eyes focused not on the room, but on the child curled inside. Eliza stirred, and then, with a grace born of dream logic, she lifted her arm. Tiny fingers reached out toward the glass, not fumbling, not swatting, but with strange intention. As if she wasn't just reacting, but recognizing. Juniper didn't blink, and Eliza smiled. Not a reflex, not gas, a real smile, gummy and soft. Seconds passed, or maybe more, and then the moment broke. Juniper stepped back and was gone. Silently, as if she'd never been. Later that evening, as the lullaby machine breathed soft strains across the walls, Eliza's father passed by the nursery on the way to bed. And paused. There, a glint. Not outside. Inside. Curled in the far corner of the nursery, nestled like a shadow among stuffed animals, was Juniper. Not startled. Not hiding. Only waiting. Her gaze found his, calm and immeasurable. And though every muscle in him told him a cat shouldn't be here, that a door must have been left open or a window slipped, the words didn't come. He stared. She blinked. And Eliza kept sleeping. He backed out slowly and fetched his wife. When they returned, the cat hadn't moved. "What do we do?" she whispered. He didn't answer. There was something liminal in the room, like stepping into a dream. Juniper's tail flicked once. Deliberate. Quiet. A choice. Eliza stirred, then settled again, one hand loosely clenched near where Juniper lay. No hissing. No scratching. Just the gentle rhythm of breathing. Baby and cat. They stood there for a while. Unmoving. Until the night crept deeper, and the only sound left in the house was silence, humming softly like memory under the floorboards. In the morning, Juniper was gone. No opened windows. No pawprints this time. Only the lingering trace of presence. And when Eliza woke, she rolled toward the place where Juniper had been. Meep. A single word. Uncoached. Not kitty. Not cat. Just meep. She'd say it every night going forward, just before her eyes slipped shut. Not every evening brought appearance. But on the nights she came, Juniper never meowed. Never begged or pawed. She simply settled near the crib, so close her breath stirred the baby's curls, and watched. There was a peace to it. And so the name stayed. Meep. Not because it made sense, but because love never really needs to. At first, it felt like coincidence. A fluke wrapped in comfort. But over time, Juniper's visits began to form a pattern, delicate, unspoken, exact. She came not at random, but with the precision of something older than habits. Every dusk, as the horizon rehearsed its indigo hush, Juniper appeared. Sometimes already inside, sometimes outside the nursery's screen, waiting. Never scratching. Never a sound. Just there, as if born from the dimming light. The first time they caught her in the act, Eliza's mother stood silently in the hallway, half hidden by the doorframe. She didn't move, didn't breathe too deeply. Watched as the cat approached the crib, slow and purposeful, as if not to wake something sacred. Juniper leapt not with force, but grace, a glide of fur and bone landing with no sound. She sniffed once at Eliza's cheek, then curled herself along the inner edge of the crib, just below the baby's knees. A perfect arc of gray protection. The baby didn't stir. She exhaled softly and reached in her sleep, palm landing in Juniper's fur with practiced ease, like a key returning to its lock. "It's never me," the mother whispered once, days later, to the nursery's wallpaper. She never clings to me like that. But then again, some guardians come from elsewhere. Eliza slept like she was wrapped in a lullaby spun by trees. No middle of the night sobs. No startled cries. The monitor, once buzzing with small noises, a cough, a baby's shifting moan, now only hummed with contentment. Silence, pulled into shape. After 2 weeks, the parents dared test the pattern. They brought Juniper a bowl of milk. She didn't drink it. They tried cornering her gently with a pet carrier once, curiosity pulling louder than respect. But Juniper vanished faster than hands could reach. She reappeared the next night, just as calm. As if to say, "This is not yours to define." They stopped trying after that. Because no matter what they did, Juniper came back. Not for food, not for play, only for Eliza. They began to notice details. Juniper always curled in the same position, facing the door. Never directly touching the child, except when Eliza reached for her. She blinked slowly at anyone who entered the room while Eliza slept, a gaze neither challenging nor afraid. Merely aware. One night, a wind blew open the front mail slot and tossed the hallway into a chorus of creaking. The baby didn't stir, but Juniper did. Her head lifted. Her body stiffened into stillness. She stood and patted softly to Eliza's shoulder. Stayed there until the quiet returned to its rightful shape. In the morning, the paw print appeared as always. Just one. Pressed into the edge of the crib like punctuation at the end of a poem. The parents began to trust her. Not in the logical way, not in the way you'd trust a pet trained to heal or come when called. But in the way a person might trust a prayer or the instinct that slows you just before stepping into the road. There is a phrase some old farmers used to say before bedtime, passed down through families thick with toothache weather and rain-scabbed windows. Circle of safety, they'd whisper as they tucked in their children. What they meant was this: a hope that something unseen would settle around their little ones at night. A hedge against wild dreams. A hand on the small of the back through the dark. Juniper was that hand. More than once, one of them would blink sleep from their eyes in the deep jaw of night, and wander past the nursery. The lamp cast only a soft glow. The crib held only peace. And Juniper, sentinel and silent, would lift one ear, acknowledging them, but never move. In those moments, they stopped wondering if she was theirs. She wasn't. She was Eliza's. Or maybe not even that. She was just here, holding the space where all thin things pass. Between waking and sleep. Between this world and something softer. Animals don't explain themselves. They don't ask permission to keep you safe. They don't negotiate for understanding. They come when they come. They stay when needed. They go when done. Juniper never asked for anything in return. She only stayed until the baby's breathing fell into that deep rhythm usually reserved for the ocean, or wind moving in tall grass. And then, by dawn, she was gone. But she had completed something. Left behind a sense of symmetry. A sense that the night had been held at the corners. A circle drawn around a crib, not in chalk or spell, just in breath, and fur, and the quiet resolve to stay. Eliza's mother didn't think much of it at first. A strange cat visiting the nursery, a baby girl sleeping deeper than dreams, a peace in the house that felt borrowed from somewhere older than the walls. But one night, brushing her teeth, the mother noticed something in the mirror, not behind her, but inside herself. A tug, something unformed. And later, curled in bed beside her husband, her breath catching in the hush of the room, a memory crept through her. It came not as a full image, but a feeling. A sensation of purring near her face. Of warmth pressed against her cheek during a storm she'd long since forgotten. Her room had been different. The wallpaper pale yellow. She must have been 6, maybe younger. There had been a cat. She remembered it now, like pulling color from old film. A cat with white paws. Like socks dipped in snow. And those eyes, green not like emerald, but like something lit from inside. She sat upright. Her heart beat louder than it should have. She whispered to herself to let it go. Childhood memories were slanted things, always reshaping. Sometimes you imagined bits that never truly were. But that night, she stood slowly and crossed the hallway, just to be sure. Her bare feet pressed soft into old wood. Eliza was sleeping in the crib. Juniper curled beside her, and that's when she saw it. The position, the barest rise of fur with breath. The way Juniper turned her head, slow and steady, and blinked once at her, as if to say, "You remember, don't you?" She didn't speak. Didn't breathe too fast, because something inside her said speaking was the wrong language for this meeting. Back in her room, she sat at the edge of the bed and stared at her hands. She didn't tell her husband. Not then. Words were fragile things, liable to scatter or dissolve this thread of wonder. Instead, memories began to collect quietly. The cat who showed up the week she caught pneumonia at age 7. The one who left when she got better. The way she'd drawn pictures of it for weeks afterward, always the same boots, the same gaze. No one had believed her then. They said it had been a stray. No name, no collar, feral and forgettable. But now, it was hard to mistake those eyes. She remembered their old house, even the gray tin of the mailbox, the flutter of the moths at the porch light. She remembered waking once with a tiny weight beside her pillow, and soft fur under her hand. And how, when her fever broke, the cat had been gone. No pictures survived, no videos, only what was left inside her, half-believed. A maybe kind of dream. Until now. That next morning, when the soft paw print waited as usual on Eliza's blanket, the mother placed her hand near it. Not to touch, but to compare. The paw was small, deliberate, familiar. All she could whisper was, "You came back." That evening, she sat alone on the porch as the edge of light pooled into rust and violet. She looked to the trees. She waited with nothing held too tightly in her hands. Juniper emerged from the shadows like she'd stepped out of the breath between branches. She didn't approach, didn't blink. Only looked through her, and in that gaze, the mother saw not time, not repetition, but continuity. A thread stretched gently through seasons and names. A comfort that didn't end, just borrowed different shapes. She smiled through tears she didn't fully understand. And for the first time, she whispered into the dusk, "Thank you." Juniper turned, and padded toward the house. Juniper only came in the dark. No one ever saw her during the day, not folded on a sunlit windowsill, not shadowing footfalls in the garden. She didn't linger on porch steps or pass through open doorways with a tail held high. She came with twilight, as if conjured by the falling hush that knitted across rooftops once supper dishes were dried and put away. The sound of her arrival was never heard. No thump of landing paws. No door swinging open. Yet, every evening, the same quiet ritual unfolded. Juniper would be there, as dusk slipped between floorboards and ceiling beams, as lullabies softened and the folded laundry cooled untouched on the couch. She would curl alongside the crib, not always on the blanket, sometimes at the base like a barrier. Sometimes pressed against the wooden bars like a breath caught halfway through a promise. Eliza would settle. As always, it felt like watching two elements find each other, like tide drawing into moon, like frost discovering glass. Her parents stopped trying to decipher it. During the day, the baby giggled, cooed, reached for blocks and spoons and faces. But bedtime was sacred. Before her eyes blinked closed, her fingers would stretch and flex in search of something. Not a pacifier, not a bear, but the gentle bow of fur. If Juniper wasn't there yet, she'd wait. Palms curled, breath slowing, murmuring softly to the air. Meep. Sleep. That was what she began to call her. Meep. It began like all toddler words do, harmless, funny, mysterious in their own right. Meep didn't mean anything, except, somehow, it meant everything. Her third word, first, mama, then, light, and then, meep. The first time they heard it clearly, her mother blinked. What does meep mean, sweetheart? But she didn't answer. She only turned her cheek to the side, as though something warm had brushed it, and whispered again, meep sleep. The name stitched itself into the household. They said it without meaning to. Did Meep come last night? Did you see Meep? Where's Meep hiding? It became part of the bedtime rhythm. Not story time, not song, but the expectancy of her arrival. No matter how the day went. No matter how loud or full or difficult. When the skies dimmed behind rustling curtains, Meep would arrive. But never before dusk. Juniper remained absent in the bright hours, no matter how much they called or searched or coaxed. Even when they left windows slightly open, even when bowls of food went untouched. She resisted all categories of explanation. Even the vet, brought in once under the guise of casual concern, had no answers. No collar, no chip. Strange temperament. Not feral, but not domestic either. Like she's between. And then the cat would vanish again for another 20 hours. It made no logical sense. But when Eliza grew feverish once, for a single night, Juniper laid long beside her, tail curled just beneath the chin, like punctuation. And the child slept through it. No tossing, no restless moans, just sweat on the brow and the curl of fur beside her cheek. The next day, Eliza was well. Once, the power went out. The baby monitor clicked, lights died, and silence thickened like fog. Her mother moved to check in, candles trembling faintly in hand. But when she opened the door, Juniper was already there, straight-spined by the crib, fur barely moving with the wind from the cracked window. Her gaze flicked back, not startled, reassuring. Her ears swiveled, but she didn't leave. Eliza breathed softly. In, out, in. Eyes fluttered, then closed. And below, on the cotton blanket, one perfect paw print began to form in the dust, even before the mother turned away. After that, no one questioned her comings or goings. One night, in early spring, her parents stood for a long time outside the nursery door, listening. Inside, one child, one cat, and a sound like breathing in unison. A single hush held steady. Some nights, that breath felt like the thread holding the walls together. As though Juniper's rhythm gave the house permission to keep standing another day. To keep its edges from unraveling. They spoke less about her now. Not from fear, but reverence. She was no longer something to figure out. She simply was. And always, always gone by morning. No fur on furniture. No prints on the floors. Only that quiet indent circling the baby like a seal in wax. Signed, but never seen. It began with thunder. Not the distant kind that waits patiently on the horizon, but the kind that cracks something open. That shakes windows in their frames and pulls old fears out from under childhood beds. The sky boiled black that night. Rain came sideways across the glass, like it had purpose. The walls of the house groaned in their sleep, timbers flexing with every gust. It was the kind of storm that made silence impossible and memories loud. And, for the first time since she was born, Eliza screamed. It wasn't a fussing cry or a startled whimper. It was wild and sudden, from deep in her chest. Sharp, raw. Her parents woke half breath, half panic. They didn't even grab robes, just stumbled out of bed, hearts thudding harder than the thunder. The power had gone out. Hallway dark. Monitor dead. No hum. No lullaby light. Just the bleak blink of nothing waiting at the nursery door. And when they opened it, she was already there. Juniper. No one had let her in. Even the front windows were locked against the storm. But Juniper stood upright at the side of the crib, tail wrapped tight, fur slick with wet. Her head was tilted, not fearfully, but alert. Watching something unseen. She didn't look at the parents. Didn't flinch. Just placed one white paw on the wooden rail and looked down at Eliza, who hiccuped between sobs. The parents froze in the doorway. They had never seen her arrive. Never seen her drenched. Never seen her angry or afraid. And she wasn't. Not even now. She was present. The air shifted. Juniper jumped lightly into the crib, landing with such care it barely disturbed the blankets. She stepped forward, slow as breath, and curled herself tight against the baby's torso, tucking her tail along Eliza's small chest like sealing something shut. The baby's cries slowed. Her limbs stopped flailing. Her breathing synced, gradually, with the soft rise and fall of Juniper's back. And before the next roll of thunder could finish shouting at the sky, Eliza had fallen silent. Her hand, shaking and small, found the cat's ear in the dark. Clutched it gently. Fell still. The parents didn't move. To move would be to fracture something they weren't meant to be part of, to insert themselves into a moment too sacred for interruption. They backed out. Slowly. No questions. No reasons. Only awe. They lit candles in the kitchen. Sat in the amber hush, neither fully awake nor asleep. The storm stretched on. But the house didn't shake quite as much. Later, much later, the mother crept back to the nursery. Juniper remained. Eyes closed now. Breathing slow. She looked smaller somehow. Like the weight of watching had finally dropped from her shoulders. She stayed there till morning. And in the first light of dawn, when the sky barely remembered the grief it had carried through the night, Juniper was gone. Only a paw print beside Eliza's hip remained. Just one. The crib smelled faintly of rain. And Eliza did not stir. Some guardians do not knock. Some arrive only when called, not by voice, but by need, loud and clear as lightning. And some never leave completely. They wait, just behind the thunder. Eliza was 5 when it happened. One morning, in the in-between space before sunrise, her mother noticed something strange in her daughter's breath. Slow. Slower than it should be. Her skin was warm, too warm. No appetite. No smile. Just silence, heavy and wrong. The pediatrician called it a fever of unknown origin. Nothing alarming, but to err on the side of caution, they ran their tests. Swabbed and poked and frowned thoughtfully. Rest, they said. Fluids. Wait it out. But mothers know. And this felt deeper than a seasonal ache. The house dimmed in its own way, shadows thickening even in midday light. Laughter didn't rise. The tea ran cold. Juniper did not come. For 2 nights, the crib lay empty of whispers, of warmth. Eliza tossed fitfully, murmuring words they couldn't decipher. Sweat soaked her curls. Her fingers clutched invisible threads in the air. No paw prints on the blanket. No fur. No trace. Her father stayed up longer than usual the second night, pacing. He wanted to call someone. Anyone. Her mother stood by the window instead, watching wind move without trees, watching dusk fall without pause. Juniper had never missed 2 nights in a row. And on the 3rd night, it rained. Not a storm, just a quiet soak. Measured. The kind that smells like leaves and unspoken things. At midnight, the door moved slightly. Not opened. Not pushed. Just shifted. And there she was. Wetter than they'd ever seen her, not dripping, but as if the rain had passed through her. Her fur was damp but clean, her paws silent as always. And in her mouth, the impossible. A single chamomile blossom. Wild grown. Not from gardens, not from pots. The kind that clings to hillsides and edges of old roads. Its petals were intact. Juniper walked without hesitation to the crib and leapt inside, laying the bloom gently on Eliza's pillow. She did not look at the parents. She only turned herself in a small, perfect circle and settled by Eliza's side, their shapes folding into sleep together. By morning, the fever had broken. Eliza opened her eyes as if from a long nap and asked for toast with honey, her voice a croak between strings. Her skin was cool. Her gaze was clear. The blossom still lay on the pillow. Still fresh. Still whole. Her mother pressed it in a book that afternoon. Without a label or note. As if deep down she already knew no words would explain it properly. And that night, Eliza cupped her hands together as Juniper curled beside her and whispered, "Thank you, Meep." The cat didn't purr. Didn't blink. Just listened, as she always had. Word spreads in strange ways. Not all at once, not like a shout through a crowd, but like a hush you notice only after it has settled. It began with simple questions. Casual, offhand. "Have you seen a gray cat lately?" Boot pawed. Green eyes. There'd be a pause. Then a furrowed brow. A nod. Sometimes a shiver like remembering something that hadn't finished being understood. Neighbors spoke quietly across fences, at bus stops, in grocery store lines when the clerk's scanner stuttered. I think I saw her, just sitting, for hours. On my porch swing after my daughter came home from surgery. She didn't move, just stayed nearby. My dog was restless, until the cat arrived. Then, nothing. Peace. Like something had clicked. In the little library on Main, the librarian whispered to someone returning a dog-eared romance novel. She appeared the night my mother passed. Sat beneath the foot of the hospice bed. Never made a sound. I thought she was a hallucination. But the nurse saw her too. A florist down the road swore she'd found Juniper curled on the counter one morning after the break-in, among crushed petals and overturned vases. Nothing was taken, but the cat had kept her eyes on the doorway all night, unmoving. At first, people assumed it was a coincidence. A stray with good timing. A fluke of fur and shadow. But then came the patterns. Always gray. Always soft-pawed and silent. Never hungry. Never startled. Never asking for anything. Only staying until something fragile had been tended. She didn't meow, someone said, hugging a cup of coffee. She just looked at me. Like she knew my bones were tired. Like she'd been waiting until I needed to cry. No one claimed her. And still, she returned, to the lonely, the sick, the frightened, the grieving. Someone chasing deadlines in a cold office found her curled under the desk lamp, resting against the hum of the heater, as if guarding the last shiver of light. A boy with a broken arm woke in the night to feel a warm pressure beside him, skeptical, then comforted. There was a cat in my bed, he told his mother. She told me not to be scared. No one laughed. Some called her Saint Juniper. Others, just Meep. Drawings were taped to telephone poles with no lost listed, only seen. In chalked sidewalk art, she appeared next to hopscotch grids. In crayon, she was rendered sleeping beside angels. Sometimes with wings, sometimes without. A collage of rumors turned to belief. Not loud belief. Not the sort that comes with declarations. It moved quietly, like she did. One woman, old enough to have forgotten more things than she remembered, said, "We've had cats like her before, haven't we? Every few decades. Every time something starts to feel fragile." Parents, whose children described cuddling with a soft friend during nap time, would look at each other and not dispute it. Teachers noticed students calmed after encounters they couldn't quite prove. She came into the schoolyard once, one recalled. During a fire drill, all the kids were frightened by the alarm. But she sat there, and they gathered around her without speaking. The noise didn't seem to matter then. No one could find where she lived. No markings, no prints, only a warmth left behind. If you left your door open during twilight, you might return to find one spot of fur pressed gently into your couch. Not an intrusion, a visit, a reassurance. She was never seen walking down streets, never darted through alleys like other strays. She simply was, here and then not. Always appearing for someone, never for spectacle. People began to talk differently. More softly, more kindly. They shared cups of tea without waiting to be asked. Brought extra soup. Opened windows they used to keep closed tight. Because if Juniper could come and go unseen, if she walked among them not for glory, but for need, then perhaps they too were meant to be guardians, in small ways. The world, after all, is braver when it is watched over. And sometimes, that watching comes on 4 silent paws, with eyes the color of deep forests. The furthest thing from myth. And all the closer to miracle. Children grow. It happens gradually, until one day you notice that the reach of their fingers spans more of your palm than it used to. The cradle they once filled becomes a bench for stuffed animals. The lullabies fade, replaced by storybooks and questions that come with squinted eyes and tilted heads. Eliza grew taller. Her legs unfolded like saplings testing light. Her laugh deepened. Her gaze sharpened, though it never lost that edge of quiet wonder. But Juniper didn't change. She remained the same sable gray cat, her white-booted paws moving with the same deliberate pace, eyes still like pools after rain. She came each evening, just as she had when Eliza was a coo in a crib. Only now, the dynamic was different. Eliza no longer needed swaddling. She no longer slept curled tightly into herself. But, somehow, she always left just enough space on her pillow. Just enough room beneath the blanket's curve. And Juniper still came, not every night. Not as clockwork, but just often enough. There were seasons, weeks even, when Juniper didn't appear. No pawprint on the quilt. No warm dent where she'd curled. But Eliza never seemed worried. She comes when it's important, Eliza would say, and go to sleep without fear. Her parents watched this with a kind of reverence. They no longer questioned where Juniper came from, only registered her presence like they would a strong breeze or the scent of lilacs on the stairwell. When Eliza caught a mild cold at age 8, Juniper returned that night, pressing softly against her back. No chamomile this time, no wild offerings, just her warmth. They slept back to back, like old friends at camp, one breathing just slightly behind the other. Other times, Juniper crept in during the hush after nightmares that Eliza no longer told her parents about. Nights when the world felt too wide, too sharp, and Eliza would wake just enough to feel the cat's fur beneath her palm. "Hi, Meep," she'd murmur, only half awake. "I'm okay now." And Juniper would stay. Not all night, not always, but long enough. By now, the girl no longer left her door open on purpose. She didn't leave food out or draw pictures of the cat. That stage had passed. But on certain quiet nights, those rare ones when moonlight pooled thick like cream under her window, Eliza's breath would hitch, and she'd glance toward her feet with expectation. Sometimes Juniper was already there. Other times, she came minutes later. But still she came. One night that summer, Eliza whispered, "Do you watch over other kids, too?" Juniper blinked once. "Do you know my dreams before I do?" A pause. The cat stretched. Settled in. Eliza reached over and laid her hand gently on Juniper's back. "I hope so," she said. "You'd like them." That winter, Eliza stayed up an hour past bedtime to write something on folded paper, which she tucked beneath her pillow. She didn't tell anyone, but the next morning, the paper was gone. And on the windowsill, a tiny feather. White, almost translucent. They didn't speak about these things aloud. But Juniper still returned, whenever the world tilted, even slightly. Like an old lighthouse light, blinking only when fog drew close. Some bonds don't fade. Some guardians don't leave. They just appear when the need whispers loud enough to call them down. And for Eliza, it never had to whisper very loud at all. Eliza was almost 18 when it happened. The boxes were already half loaded into her car. Taped corners pressed awkwardly against the passenger seat. She'd labeled everything: books, sweaters, old notebooks, 3 jars of beach glass that she couldn't bear to throw away. Her parents had made her a thermos of tea for the road. There were tears, yes, but only small ones. The kind that slip down quietly, not the sobs that rattle through walls. It was her last night in the house. The nursery had become a bedroom years ago, bed frame exchanged, stuffed animals boxed, crayons replaced by bent-spined journals, but the walls still remembered. The floor still creaked the same way near the closet. And the window still looked out over the slant of old oaks and the worn gate her father never got around to oiling. She left the door open that night. Intentionally. Not wide. Just enough. The sheets felt different, knowing she wouldn't sleep in them again for a while. The pillow seemed thinner. The silence deeper. She lay still, staring at the ceiling, listening for that breath of sound that once meant Meep had arrived. But the hours passed and no steps brushed the rug. No quiet thump at the foot of the bed. The air remained unchanged. She finally drifted into sleep, somewhere between breath and memory. And just before dawn, there it was, the soft pressure of fur sliding across her arm. She didn't startle. Not fully. Her eyes fluttered but didn't open. A warmth curled near her rib cage, a sigh of closeness that didn't have to ask permission. A meow, impossibly small, as if spoken more for farewell than greeting. Eliza's hand moved without thought, brushing what could have been an ear or the edge of a dream. And then, the weight lifted. The covers shifted. The morning held its breath. By the time the sun slipped into the sky through the cracks in the curtain, she was alone. There was no fur, no paw print on the quilt, no warmth at her side. Only the faintest scent in the air, something like honeysuckle after rain. She sat up slowly. For a long moment, she didn't move. Just pressed her hand flat against the spot where the warmth had been, no longer warm. She smiled, then stood. She folded the sheets, picked up her last bag, took one final look at the room that had carried her through every version of herself. The walls were still, but somehow, they felt like they'd said goodbye too. And though Juniper was nowhere to be seen, Eliza didn't need to look for her. Because some farewells aren't endings. They're acknowledgments. A nod from one story to another. A leaf falling with grace, not grief. She walked out of the house, the door closing soft behind her. And the room waited, quiet, but not empty. Not entirely. Eliza had a child of her own now. Leo. He was a quiet boy, all soft shoes and wide eyes, the kind that listened more than he spoke. His words came late, not because he lacked them, but because he didn't need them right away. He seemed to understand the world through silence first, then sound. From the start, he startled no one. Did everything in his own rhythm. Slept deeply. Cried rarely. And every once in a while, looked past Eliza's shoulder and smiled, as if someone had just entered the room that she couldn't see. They lived in a small house on a hill, not unlike the one from Eliza's childhood. A little less creaky, but still wrapped in breeze and twilight. Leo's nursery was painted in fog blues and pale gold. There was a rocking chair that sighed when she sat down, and a toy rabbit that always seemed to fall facing the window. He was 6 months old when it happened. No sound, no flash of movement, just a murmur of instinct. She woke before him that day, the morning soft like memory, and went to check on him, not from worry, but from something older than that. He lay on his back, mouth slightly open, breathing even. At the base of the crib was a circle of fur. Gray, compact, still, white paws curled neatly beneath the body. Ears relaxed. And two green eyes, half-lidded, barely glinting in the soft light. Eliza froze in the doorway. She hadn't seen Juniper in years. Not since that last morning. The scent of honeysuckle. The shift in the blankets. She hadn't searched. There had never been a page torn off a calendar to mark her absence, just growing up, and the space that comes with it. But now, here, the same weightless silence. The same shape she remembered opening her heart to as a child. No change, not even the faintest fading of color in her fur. Juniper stirred only enough to acknowledge her, one small flicker of a glance. Not interruption, recognition, and Eliza felt herself smile without knowing why. "Hello, old friend," she whispered. Juniper blinked slowly, closed her eyes again. Leo shifted. He reached one hand toward the cat and grasped the fur between her shoulder blades, not hard, not clumsy. Just enough. And Juniper didn't flinch. She tucked herself in more closely and rested her chin by his knee, like she had waited just long enough for this moment to be found again. Eliza didn't move, not for a long time. She said nothing to her husband, only left the door open wider that night and placed a folded quilt across the bottom half of the crib. And each morning after that, when Leo would wake before the sun, babbling into the air, she would find Juniper already gone. No footprints, no fur, just the weight of a bond remembered. As if love could cross through years like stepping stones in mist. As if some threads never fray, they only stretch. Wind would rise sometimes in the small hours, brushing the window glass just so, and Leo would smile in his sleep, turn toward the wall, and whisper a sound not far from a name. Not cat, not kitty, Meep, and Eliza would pause each time in the hallway, her hand at the edge of the door, and close her eyes. Because she knew what it meant to be watched over. She knew exactly what it meant. Some stories aren't passed down, they're carried. Worn under the skin like threadbare fabric, never quite recalled, never truly forgotten. They move not in words, but in gestures. In flickers of recognition. In the way a child falls asleep more easily when they believe they are not alone. Juniper was never spoken of in textbooks, or fairy tales, or hushed family histories. But she was there. In the way Eliza turned her head just so when someone entered the room quietly. In the curl of Leo's fingers against his pillow, waiting not for comfort, but for something known. There was no need to tell him stories about Meep. Not really. Because some things are felt before they are named. One evening, as Leo traced the pattern on his blanket, he asked, "Will Meep come when I have to be brave?" Eliza didn't answer right away. She tucked the corner of the sheet a little tighter. Smoothed his hair. "She comes when someone needs her," she said simply. But how does she know? Eliza looked out the window, where the sky turned the color of old violets. "She's always listening." Leo nodded. That was enough. Juniper was not only tied to them. Her presence echoed beyond blood, beyond address. Across town, someone else would feel the shift, the hush before a cat appeared on the windowsill with no sound and no explanation. A teenager grieving a friend, sitting cross-legged on the floor, eyes red and dry. A nurse leaning against cool tile, strength fraying. A widow waking on her first morning alone, thinking the quiet would crush her, until a warm body pressed against her ankle, just once. She moved not by invitation, but by thread. A hidden kind of stitching between hearts. No leash, no origin. She was not passed down like a watch or a name. But in the spaces people left behind when they healed, she remained woven there. Sleeping children drew her in like breath. Unspoken hope pulled her like tide. And in the stillness between dusk and deep night, she stepped through. Never loudly, never noticed unless needed. Sometimes Leo would murmur nonsense in his sleep, syllables shaped like leaves drifting over water, and Eliza would pause outside his door, recognizing the pattern. A rhythm passed from her own childhood. A rhythm that never truly went quiet. In dreams, Leo would see flashes, fur like smoke, eyes like moss, the weightless press against his knees. He never drew her in full. Only fragments. A tail curved like a question mark. A single white paw hovering mid-step. But he knew her. Some connections slip through generations, not like thunder, but like scent. Like a song hummed with no memory of who first sang it. And Juniper drifted through them all, Eliza, Leo, the others whose names never made it to paper. A silent witness. A gentle seam sewn between need and comfort. Not every family has her. But those who do, understand that guardians are not always human. That care, when true, does not demand recognition. It only asks to be allowed. And returned, not in words, but in rest. Leo turned 7 in the quiet month of October, when the air smelled like baked leaves and the sun dipped early, pulling long shadows behind swings and sidewalks. He'd stopped needing lullabies, mostly. Read books on his own now, turning pages with fingers slightly too big for their patience. He laughed harder, tripped less, and asked bigger questions. But every now and then, on nights when words felt too heavy or sleep too far, he'd still glance toward the base of the bed and whisper, "Meep?" A call without urgency. Just hope. Juniper hadn't come as often in the past year. And when she did, it was always when something trembled just beneath the surface, after a scraped knee, or a dream where someone got lost, or the sudden, unnameable sadness that sometimes visited growing children after lights out. She never stayed long now. Not all night, just long enough to still the heartbeat into a gentler rhythm. That 7th birthday came quietly. Cake, a candle blown out with cheeks puffed and eyes shut tight. A hug from his mother that lasted a moment longer than expected. A nightlight flicked on in a room painted slightly darker than it had been the year before. He fell asleep quickly, exhausted in the way only 7-year-olds know, dragging knees and yawns and dreams half-formed before even lying down fully. Juniper came late, sometime between the hour when dreams start and the one when they deepen. She made no sound, slipped into the room like wind through wheat. Her paws barely creased the threadbare rug. Leo didn't open his eyes, but something in him shifted, turned toward her presence with familiarity, not surprise. Like he'd been waiting without knowing he was. She jumped lightly onto the bed. Nestled beside him. Curled into the hollow at the bend of his knees, the same way she had for so many nights before, first for his mother, then for him. He reached out without looking and rested one hand against her fur. His breathing slowed. No words. Just warmth moving between them like an old tune remembered by heart. Neither stirred for a long time. And then, just before dawn, Juniper lifted her head. She stood carefully, as if not to wake him, and padded across the blanket without sound. She paused once at the edge of the bed. Glanced at him. Once. And then, she was gone. When he woke, there were no signs she'd been there. No dent in the comforter. No paw print. No warmth left behind on his skin. But Leo sat up slowly. Rubbed his eyes. Looked toward the foot of the bed, as if expecting to see something that had already tucked itself away. He smiled. A quiet, knowing thing. And said nothing. Some departures don't need fanfare. They only need stillness. And the faintest echo of presence, left not in objects, but in how deeply we sleep, and how freely we wake. There are stories we never write down. They live instead between the folds of memory, tucked into the places where breath softens, where silence holds its shape. They pass from one cradle to another, not in ink, but in warmth gathered near the chest. Not all love announces itself. Some arrives quietly. Some pads in on soft feet, pressing lightly against the air, leaving only an impression you feel under the skin. And then it curls beside you and says nothing at all. If you've ever woken just before dawn, heart calm and breath deep, and felt not alone, but accompanied, then perhaps you've known it, too. Not all guardians wear faces we recognize. Some come cloaked in the shape we most need, to be soothed, not startled. To be close, not commanding. Some come as warmth where there was cold, as stillness where there was ache. Some come with pause. No matter how many years pass, no matter how strong we grow or how deeply we forget, something ancient rises in us when nights turn long and fear presses at the edges. Children know this best. Before language hardens, before the sky shrinks, before we trade wonder for certainty, children still leave space beside them. Just in case, just enough. Because love, when true, does not need reminding where to return. It finds you, on porches, on window ledges, at red-eyed dusk and breathless midnight. It appears when you've stopped expecting, answers questions you never dared speak aloud. It presses close and waits. Not asking anything, just staying, long enough to say, I'm here. I never left. And when its work is done, it goes. No sound, no ripple, just the hush that remains. So if one night, years from now, you wake to find one gentle weight at your side, and the air smells faintly of something green and old, don't look too quickly. Don't speak too loud. Just close your eyes. Let yourself be small again. Let yourself remember. Because some love doesn't vanish. It simply waits for dust to settle before finding its way back home. Sometimes, when children dream, they carry things back with them. Not objects, not facts, but feelings, as though their dreams were pockets stitched with threads of somewhere else. And when they wake, there remains the faint shape of something that mattered. Even if they don't remember why. Leo had started asking new questions. Not about school, or stars, or what makes thunder. But about absences. Why'd I feel like someone is missing when I wake up? His voice was calm. Not sad, exactly. More, wondering. Eliza opened her mouth to answer. Closed it again. Because how do you tell a child that someone they loved may still be watching, even when they can't see them anymore? How do you explain presence that leaves no shadow? Sometimes, she said softly, our hearts remember even when our minds forget. Leo tilted his head. Like music we heard a long time ago? Exactly. He nodded as though it made perfect sense. Around that time, drawings began to appear. Crayon sketches tucked into the corners of his notebooks. Tiny cats, always gray. Sometimes only a tail. Sometimes only a paw. Never the whole shape. She's hard to draw, Leo explained. She doesn't want me to get her wrong. Eliza asked, do you still see her? Leo shrugged. Sometimes. Not like before. I think she's busy. Busy. Eliza smiled. The word caught somewhere between laughter and longing. Because she, too, still dreamed sometimes. And in those dreams, Meep, Juniper, visited briefly. Not always visible. A swish of movement. A soft green gaze at the corner of a door. A feeling of warmth folding gently against memory. As if to say, I still look in on you. Just, from farther away. And always, when she woke, there would be that same ache between her ribs and something like calm pressing over it. One morning, Leo ran to her holding a feather. Gray, soft, almost unreal in how easily it bent between his fingers. "It was in my shoe," he said, breathing fast. "I didn't put it there." Eliza took it carefully, cradled between her palms. "It's from her," Leo whispered, as though speaking too loud might send it away. "I think so," she replied. He nodded. "She's still around." And Eliza believed him, not because of the feather, but because of the certainty in his voice. That old, familiar conviction that children carry like magic before the world convinces them to trade it in. They pressed the feather into a book together. Quietly. No label. No name. Just a moment wrapped in stillness. Later that week, Leo found himself calming another child on the playground during a fall, holding their hand, not saying much, just staying close. That was kind, his teacher praised. Leo just shrugged. Felt like the right thing. Eliza watched from a distance, a calm curling inside her where fear had once lived. Because even when guardians leave, something of them stays behind. Not just presence, but patterns. Care taught without words. Love passed through touch, not explanation. The shape of the watcher becomes part of the watched. And so, in quiet ways, it continued. Not through visitations, but through remembering. Not by waiting, but by becoming. Juniper had once curled beside a heartbeat in a crib. And now, that child held space for others. Gently, as if she had been shown how. When Leo turned 11, he began walking home from school by himself. It wasn't far, just 3 streets and a crossing with a sleepy light that took its time turning red. Still, something about the walk felt older than it should. Like stepping into a worn coat that others had worn before him. He didn't notice it at first. The way birds quieted slightly when he passed. The subtle hush that settled just above the pavement. How his shadow always seemed a pace behind, not ahead. But one afternoon, the kind where clouds gathered like thoughts unsaid, he paused at the corner before his home. Someone had chalked a small shape into the sidewalk. A cat. Not cartoonish. Not detailed. Just a rough outline. 4 white paws. A tail curved inward like a question. Leo stared at it, tilted his head, and smiled the way someone does when greeted by something long buried but fondly remembered. He stepped over it gently and continued on. That night, as rain tiptoed against the windows, Leo stood at his own bedroom door. Taller now, feet nearly too big for the slippers beside his bed. But inside, the part of him carved from childhood still knew how to listen. He whispered, quiet enough that only the dark could hear, "Meep?" Nothing answered, not at first. But in his dreams that night, he stood on the old nursery rug from a time he could barely remember. The crib long gone, toys faded at the edges. And she was there, not curled this time, not resting, standing, watching the door, waiting. He didn't speak, just walked forward until he was close enough to kneel. He touched her once, between the ears. "I remember," he said. Her eyes blinked slowly. She stepped forward, brushed her side against his knees. Then turned, and walked into the place where dreams end. When he woke, the morning was gray and slow. The kind of morning built for reflection. On the edge of his windowsill, a single pine needle rested. No wind had carried it. No tree grew close enough. He picked it up and held it for a long time before tucking it into the corner of a book he hadn't opened yet. Without explanation, that day at school, he sat beside a new classmate who hadn't spoken since arriving. Others had kept their questions gentle but distant. Leo didn't say much. He just sat quietly, near, present. And as the teacher began to speak, the classmate glanced once toward him, and shifted his chair just a little closer. Leo said nothing. Some kindnesses don't need volume. Some comforts don't need reason. At dinner, Eliza watched him from across the table. He was laughing at something now. Hands animated, eyes bright. And for a heartbeat, she saw herself in him, not his reflection, but the echo of what had once been comfort folded beside fear. She rose to gather dishes, and paused at the kitchen window. Nothing outside, but the air felt full, brushed with presence. She smiled without turning, because now she understood. Juniper had not only returned for Leo. She had prepared him to become the kind of person others waited for. The kind who stayed long enough, and left just enough behind. Leo was 13 the first time his dreams turned quiet. Not silent, exactly, but hushed, as if something had stepped back, waiting. He didn't notice it right away, in the bustle of school days and the shift of his limbs across seasons. Like many traces of childhood, it faded gently, folded in with simpler joys. The crack of a book's spine, the smell of sharpened pencils, the way his mother laughed differently when she was tired. But one night, a long, blue evening stretched by rain, he dreamt of the old nursery. The room was empty this time. No crib, no rug, just the walls breathing memory. And a faint warmth in the corner, where nothing sat. He tightened his fists in sleep, as if trying to gather something that had already been given. In the morning, he said nothing about the dream, only pulled his hoodie tighter walking to school, and paused slightly longer at the cracked sidewalk chalk that had long since faded to dust. That afternoon, he visited the woods behind the playground. Not deep, just far enough where the branches started to hush. He sat on a fallen log. Waited, not expectantly, but openly. Birdsong folded into stillness. Light wavered, and still, nothing came. Later at dinner, Eliza caught him looking toward the base of the staircase, where echoes used to wait. "You okay?" she asked, gently. He nodded, but his eyes were steadied by something distant. "I think she's with someone else now," he said. Eliza didn't answer. She only reached across the table and brushed her thumb over the back of his hand. That night, as Leo sat reading by the glow of an old lamp, he turned a page and something slipped free, a dried wildflower pressed long ago between chapter 6 and 7. Chamomile. Small. Frayed at the edges. He cupped it into his palm, the petals brittle against skin. It smelled of nothing now. But inside him, a shiver of something long unknown stirred. He held it a while, then placed it beneath his pillow. Not for magic, not for return, just as a thank you. 2 weeks later, whispers crept through the neighborhood of a child down the street, 3 years old, slow to smile, often startled by lightning. But lately, her mother said, she had been calmer. She'd woken once and said only one word. Clear, soft, meep. Leo heard it in the grocery store line. The name, floaty as mist between checkout lanes. He said nothing, just looked down at the loaf of bread in his hands. Smiled without meaning to. That evening he opened a new notebook, its cover untouched. And on the first page he wrote, "If you are very quiet and very kind, love might find you, even in the shape of something small. Even on pause, even when you've stopped looking." He closed the book, set it on the shelf, then lay down, with no need for whisper or watch. Some nights are full of arrival. Others, of letting go. The seasons changed the way they always do, quietly, as if not to disturb anyone noticing. Leo was 14 when he stopped waiting altogether. Not because he felt abandoned. Not because he stopped believing. But because something in him had shifted, eased open. The need was no longer the same. The ache had softened, leaving something deeper in its place, understanding. He didn't speak of Juniper anymore, not aloud. But her memory lived in how he touched animals gently, even the skittish ones. In how he paused before walking into a room, sensing its shape. In the way his fingers brushed the air above a bookshelf before choosing, as though waiting for one to call to him. One afternoon, while helping sort donations at a local shelter, he spotted a child curled in a corner. Two big hoodie sleeves covered the child's hands. Their shoes didn't match. A stuffed lemur sat leaning against their side, its fur thinning, its eyes scratched with care. They weren't crying, just folded, unready. Leo didn't speak. He knelt across the room, slowly. Settled down, a few feet away. The floor was cold through his jeans, but he didn't flinch. He looked at his hands. Picked at a seam in his collar. Waited. It took a long time. A long, long time. And then, without looking, the child said, "You're quiet." Leo smiled. "So are you." A pause. "I don't like noise." "Me neither." Silence folded itself comfortably between them. Then, softer. "Sometimes I pretend there's a cat. She's not loud. She just sits beside me when I'm scared." Leo blinked once. "What's her name?" The child shrugged. "Don't know. She won't tell me." "That's okay," Leo said. "She probably doesn't need a name, if she already knows you." The child's eyes flicked toward him. Unsure, but not afraid. Leo reached carefully into his backpack. Pulled out a folded piece of paper, its corners worn, its edges feathered with repeats. He opened it slowly, smoothed it on the floor. A drawing, rough but clear. A gray cat curled at the foot of a bed. 4 white paws. A tail curved like sleep. The child leaned forward, just slightly. "She looks familiar." Leo nodded. "She usually does." They sat together for a while, the drawing between them. When the child was ready, they stood. The paper stayed behind, not because it was forgotten, but because it had been passed on. That night, Leo sat on his windowsill as the air cooled into something early autumn. He looked out at the darkening street, homes folded into themselves, porch lights low. And for a moment, just before the hush of night swallowed all the corners of sound, he thought of a heartbeat beside his. Long ago, he placed a hand against the glass. No sound, no figure, but something warm pressed through, just behind memory. He didn't say her name. He didn't have to. The cat had never belonged to him, not really. But what she'd left behind, what she taught, that belonged to him now. And maybe, someday, he would teach someone else the same. Not with stories, not with proof, just by sitting quietly, just by staying. And when he turned off the light and crawled into bed, he did so with the certainty that he was no longer being watched over, but was learning, softly, patiently, how to do the watching himself. Leo never needed to say it aloud. But some part of him always knew, Juniper was gone. Not absent, not lost, just elsewhere, somewhere softer, somewhere she was needed more. He still opened windows during rainstorms, still left space at the end of his bed, though not for expectation. Just tradition, a quiet remembering. He moved through life with the gentleness of someone who had once memorized the shape of being held. Once, during his first year of college, he found a kitten curled beneath a library bench. Shivering, grease-lined fur, wide, uncertain eyes, no collar, no sound. Leo didn't reach out, not right away. He sat, on the floor, legs folded carefully, arms at his sides. The kitten stared, breathing fast, then slower. He stayed there for almost an hour. By the time security came, the kitten had crept into his lap and pressed its head against his palm. He carried it home tucked inside his sweater. Named it Birch. Not Meep. Not Juniper. Something new. Something that would still rustle like trees when you whispered it. Birch wasn't the same. Didn't curl beside him each night. Didn't whisper magic into storms. She was loud. She knocked things over. Chased dust like prey. But sometimes, when Leo sat too still after a long week or a hard call from home, Birch would hop up, light as nothing, and step into his lap. One paw, then another. And wait. He never told Birch about Juniper. But when he dreamed now, the old cat never appeared fully. Only ever as a shape in shadow. Eyes blinking once. A slope of fur gliding around a corner. The hush behind a child's sigh. Years passed. Leo grew taller, then steadier, then tired in the way people become tired without sadness. He moved through seasons like pages, one lesson, one joy, one grief at a time. He saw a neighbor's child laughing under a swing one day, arms outstretched, and thought to himself, without meaning to, "I hope someone's watching over you." And he said it not with longing, but belief, because he knew the world carried watchers. Maybe not always with fur, but certainly with love. He grew old, as we all do. One night, in a house that held more silence than clutter, Leo woke near dawn. No reason, no dream, just a whisper of need he couldn't name. He blinked, sat up. At the edge of the room, moonlight fell in long lines. And something stirred. He didn't move, didn't breathe too loud. A shape nestled in the doorway. Small, still, eyes like green glass dulled by time. He blinked again. It was there. Or maybe it wasn't. Didn't matter. Because warmth crept up his spine just the same. A hush folded over his chest just the same. And his hand, now older, still knew how to reach forward into the dark. Just in case something was waiting to meet it. He smiled, closed his eyes, and let the quiet hold him, as it always had.